The big unique thing about the James Bond franchise at this point seems to be that, above all else, given its long life, there's pretty much no such thing as one type of Bond film anymore. The movies have gone through so many different filmmakers, writers and styles, and have done so all through 50 plus years of an ever-changing world, that chances are, if you like your 007, you know pretty well what particular kind it is. And one thing that always bugged me about it prior to 2006 was the idea that James Bond as a character wasn't actually allowed to be one in his own right, but rather a power fantasy that took us on a tour of this elaborate universe. And while the Daniel Craig era has been somewhat of an inconsistent ride, one thing it's brought more into the foreground that I like is the idea that Bond can actually be those things, and we can worry about him not making it through the journey in one piece. And while some are more into the nitty-gritty of Casino Royale or the Dalton days, and some are more into the campy, sillier tones of the Moore period, personally, I find a mix of the two as the best approach. Hence why I don't believe the newer series truly found itself until Skyfall, which in my eyes was a perfect Bond movie. A hugely entertaining fusion of the well-written, layered protagonist that Royale reintroduced, in touching on his backstory, stripping the character down and showing him at his worst, and really exploring the complicated mother-son relationship that him and Judi Dench's M shared, with the ever-so-subtle tongue-in-cheek wink-wink celebratory reverence of the franchise overall, and the more modernistic, serious handlings of the subject matters and threats at play. But the ultimate reason it worked so well was because, instead of solely relying on plot and set pieces like a majority of the others, at its most basic level, Skyfall told a really good subversive story, something past filmmakers seemed so afraid of doing with the material prior, about these iconic characters that we were familiar with, and in turn expanding upon them through a really tight screenplay. It's nice to finally live in a time where Hollywood no longer considers James Bond crying to be some kind of blasphemous sin. Seriously, you can read up on how George Lazenby was specifically told not to cry during a key dramatic sequence in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Oh, how far we've come. So yeah, Skyfall raised the bar to quite a degree, which is why it was difficult to imagine the next entry, Spectre, being anything other than an installment very much living under the shadow of its much better older brother. It's not in the same headspace of celebrating 50 years, it doesn't have Judi Dench, it would be really hard to outdo its predecessor's script, and it can't possibly end with the same kind of air-punching everything comes full circle finale. The classic conundrum of just how good can The Dark Knight Rises really be when it's following The Dark Knight. But while yes, that's pretty much exactly what's happened, let it be known anyhow that Spectre is still a rollicking action spectacle and a really enjoyable entry into the 007 canon. In essence, it is probably everything you could ask from a James Bond movie. It's nicely shot, Sam Mendes' direction continues to astonish, it's got a brilliant action opening, some cool new characters, interesting varied locations, great chase scenes, it's always nice seeing this ensemble of British talent reunite, hell, they've even started bringing the henchmen back. Unfortunately, what's missing from it all is a good story, or at least one that feels interesting enough for Skyfall's reinventive narrative focus to feel as if it actually amounted to much in the broad scheme of things. If Spectre feels like anything, it's a slightly frustrating return to the more plot-heavy, formulaic location checkpoint adventures we're more used to seeing in the series. That's not to say that the narrative present is a bad one, just that it comes off as so passable it does feel like a step back for the franchise. Instead of us being able to actually see the nuances up on screen due to a layered script, the film chooses to rely most of its drama on fan service and callbacks for the audience to bring that extra fat into the cinema with them based on their knowledge of the series beforehand. Which is kind of a shame, since anyone not familiar with the classic era of the franchise will find themselves scratching their heads going, why is this all supposed to be so important? But I suppose demanding a super involving story from each and every installment out of a decades-long series of, let's face it, mostly average spy films is a slightly ridiculous expectation. It also doesn't faze me that I'm probably in the minority. I'm sure there's a large portion of moviegoers out there that don't look for things like story or drama in a 007 adventure, and that as long as the gadgets, the women, the villains and the set pieces are all present and accounted for, it's enough for the material to be worthy of dedicating a lazy Sunday afternoon to it. For some, that's Bond in a nutshell, and I completely get that. On those grounds, Spectre definitely delivers, but in saying that, I feel as if I'm doing a bit of a disservice to it. It's still far better than your average The World's Not Enough, a lot of care and effort has gone into the production, and it really is an earnest, entertaining, solid time of the movies you will not regret having paid money for. And it's right here that I'm going to be throwing out the minor spoiler warning. I won't be revealing twists per se, but I am going to be referencing various plot points for context reasons, so come back later if you want to go in blind. All good? Cool. So, our story picks up shortly after the events of the last. The film opens with Bond on a secret personal mission in Mexico City due to a cryptic message left to him from the past. Circumstances soon find him infiltrating a secret meeting, where it is soon uncovered that behind the scenes this whole time, as in the whole Craig era of Bond has been a secret sinister organisation working in the shadows to subtly orchestrate destruction and mayhem known as Spectre, run by Christoph Waltz's Oberhauser. And after a brief encounter with a recurring known member Mr. White, the guy Bond shoots at the end of Casino Royale and interrogates at the beginning of Quantum, he promises to protect his daughter Madeleine Swann in exchange for some information. Bond and Swann soon find themselves on the run from the bad guys and on a search for answers, both to how Oberhauser is alive when he supposedly died years earlier, and how Spectre has managed to thrive all these years and begin their mission of trying to take the organisation down. There's a side story involving Ray Fiennes' M in a power struggle against Andrew Scott's C, who's in charge of emerging between MI5 and MI6, and while it really doesn't take a genius to guess where it's all going, M, Moneypenny, Tanner and Q are all really entertaining to watch. Whishaw remains solid on his comedic timing, and Fiennes as the new M brings that integral level of gravitas to the show that's fun to see play out. There's an especially great scene between him and C where they debate the implications of putting every job of a 00 agent in the hands of computerized drones, and besides being a very topical of-the-moment subject matter, Fiennes sells the hell out of it. He also got the biggest laugh in the theatre I watched it in. And in terms of the female lead, Lea Seydoux does a nifty job in the role of Madeleine Swann. I'm not too sure why so many people are treating her initial rejection of James to be some kind of genius modernization, as if there haven't already been strong Bond women beforehand, but she really does hold her own in the fight sequences, and it's enjoyable to watch the witty banter between her and Craig. If only the film didn't then shoot itself in the foot by beginning to throw the L word around. I don't want to criticise the film for trying to make us care more in that regard, but the moment's just not earned at all. Another thing Skyfall had over this was that it didn't need to bother faffing about trying to make any sort of romance seem legit. Judi Dench was the Bond girl. If Spectre does have any problems outside of what I've already mentioned, it's the villain himself. There's a vague backstory connecting Bond and Oberhauser on a personal level, but it never really amounts to much outside of a few threatening speeches, with the added value of the villain knowing a little more about him than usual. For all the hype surrounding his identity and the big scene masking him in shadows, once all the cards are on the table, he's really not all that interesting. He makes pseudo-mysterious monologues, he's got a secret hideout, there's a scene of him torturing 007, there's a big climactic battle between the two of them. It's not much we haven't seen before. The film keeps hinting towards the viewer, oh, is this a recurring character? Is this a new player with connections to past Bond movies? Who could this possibly be? But when you get right down to it, he's basically a standard enemy that just happens to double as a walking reference. As it stands, any revelations come off as the movie trying to make up for such a by-the-numbers bad guy. None of which is helped by Craig's noticeable disinterest in the whole ordeal. He's been brilliant beforehand, but when those reveal moments do finally happen, he barely reacts to them. These are supposed to be chilling revelations, and yet they don't feel anywhere near as impactful as they should. And while I like the idea of bringing Mr. White back to tie up loose ends, since he actually does mention a secret organisation he's a part of during Quantum of Solace, to claim that every single other villain that Craig has defeated were all Spectre members as well, yep, the movie does that now, is quite frankly stupid. We like to talk these days about everything being connected in a cinematic universe, but sometimes all something like this can serve to do is make a huge world feel unintentionally small. And in this case particularly, it actually only takes away from each previous villain's distinguishable character and agenda. Oberhauser even claims at one point that he's the author of James Bond's pain, as if he's been puppeteering all the crap he's gone through in the past 3 movies like he was in charge of everything that these guys were doing, and, well, he wasn't. He's just been watching Bond's adventures and losses on a laptop all these years. The whole idea is serving to pay off something that the film seems to think has been properly set up in previous installments when, I'm sorry, it just hasn't been. It's an awkward attempt to meld Craig's previous films into one overarching plot, and to put it simply, the whole thing's an afterthought and it's really obvious. Still, for what it lacks in substance, it makes up for mostly in action and stunt work. The pre-credits opening is destined to go down as one of the franchise's best. It's probably been noted plenty of times by now, but the flick opens to a long shot following Bond as he begins his mission, which helps slowly ease the audience into the picture, and the helicopter sequence which follows is easily one of the most nail-biting, thrilling moments in the series. There's also a really fun plane chase in the snowy mountains, and anytime Dave Bautista's Mr. Hinks shows up is a bit to get excited over. I'm not sure the series is destined to live forever, but if the worst we're likely to get every few years or so are fun, albeit notably imperfect installments like Spectre, there are far worse ways to spend an evening. And for all I've said, I had fun with it regardless. There's an uncompromisingly suave aesthetic I'm glad will never depart from the franchise, and if nothing else, it's nice to see that gun barrel sequence back at the start of the film where it should be. Cheers for watching guys, and as always if you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel.